Reality is fragile. Layers of code, history, and perception. But what happens when one of those seams split? Welcome to Glitched Reality. Before we head into tonight's story, a quick piece of news from the world of Glitched Reality. The official website is now up and running, and it comes with a fully playable card game based around Season 1. So if you ever wanted to send one of those horrors across a table with someone, now you can. You'll find the website linked in the information section of this episode. Also, I'm looking for listener-submitted stories for episode 15, which will be the user-submitted story episode. I did the same thing last season, and I would love to do it again. So if you have a horror story, a strange experience, a nightmare, an urban legend, or even an original idea you would like me to read, please send it to the email attached in the information section. Now, let's head back to Greywick. Last time, Ben was searching for his sister. Arthur, the ever-present town hero, former police officer and trusted face, was there to help. Or at least, that's what everyone wanted Ben to think. But Greywick has never been a place to give up his secret easily. What happened to his sister? What waits behind the old stories, the closed doors, and the polite smiles? And when Ben finally finds the truth, will he wish he had left it buried? Welcome back to Glitched Reality. Tonight we return to the village and to the old mill. Tonight we return to Greywick. Part 2. By mid-afternoon, Leah's phone had been found near that cliff's path. Her scarf was caught on the fence post, not far from the edge, and one of her boots laid in the wet grass. Neatly, almost too neatly. Ben stood behind the police tape while gulls wheeled overhead and the sea smashed itself against the rocks below. Arthur stood beside Ben. Sometimes people hide pain well. Ben does not look at Arthur. She hated the cliffs, he says. You said she wouldn't come here at night. Ben, she wouldn't taken one boot off. Arthur sighs. Not impatiently, but sadly. You're looking for sense in the panic. Ben's face turns. Arthur's face was kind. Almost painfully kind. And Ben hated him for it. I'm looking for my sister. Arthur nods. Then let us do it properly. By evening, people had started lowering their voices when Ben entered rooms. Not because they knew something, because Arthur had given them something easier to know. Leah was troubled. Leah was tired. And Leah was asking strange questions. Leah had gone to the cliffs. By nightfall, Greywick had almost convinced itself she had jumped. Nobody said it directly to Ben. That would have been cruel. Greywick did not like to think of itself as cruel. Instead, they would say softer things, like, poor girl, you never really knew what's inside someone's head. Arthur said she seemed strained. Families don't always see. Ben wanted to scream. He wanted to drag every one of them to the seawall and tell them Leah hated the drop, hated the wind, hated the way everyone pretended their ledges did not move. But grief made the truth sound unstable. Arthur knew that. Of course he did. That evening, Greywick filled itself with search parties. Torches moved along cliff paths. People called her name into the wind that tore it apart. Arthur stood outside the lantern's hook, giving instructions. And Ben watched him from the edge of the crowd, realizing something that should have been obvious. Arthur did not need to ask people to listen, because they always were. He stood beneath the old pub sign, silver hair damp with rain, speaking in a steady voice, and the town was arranging itself around him. Beach Group, Martin, Harbour, Pete, Roadside, Elaine, Cliffs, officers. Nobody was going to Mill Road. Nobody mentioned the woods. Nobody mentioned the cold mill. Ben looked for Leah in the crowd, because grief is stupid in that way. Then he remembered what she said. I saw Callum near the cold mill. And before that, don't believe the first story. So he left before anyone could notice. Behind him, Greywick kept calling her name, but in all the wrong places. Mill Road was barely a road by the time it reached the trees. The houses thinned and then stopped entirely. The streetlights gave up. Beyond them, the lane narrowed between hedges thick with rain, brambles caught at Ben's jeans, mud stuck to his shoes. He had no plan. That mattered. Later, people would ask about him, what made him go there. They wanted instinct, evidence, some clear, clever chain of thought. But there wasn't one. He went there because Leah had mentioned it. Because they played there as children. Because she hated the cliffs. Because if the whole town was looking one way, he could not shake the feeling that someone had pointed them there. The cold mill stood half a mile beyond the last house, where the stream bent sharply through the woods. Its official name was Greywick Mill. The old stone sign stood near the gate, half sunk into the mud, the carved letters almost hidden beneath moss. But children had always called it the cold mill, because even in summer, standing near it made you feel the sun had forgotten that patch of earth. Ben remembered it now, more clearly with every step. He remembered daring Leah to touch the front door, remembering her refusing, remembering himself laughing, calling her scared, walking right up to the old porch and slapping both hands onto that wooden door. He remembered the sound from inside. A settling being, probably. A bird. A rat. Something ordinary. But Leah had cried. Properly cried. Not that fake kind of child cry they use when they want adults to intervene, but real fear. He had forgotten that promise. But she hadn't. Ben saw the mill through the trees before he reached it. A low stone building beside black water. The old wheel still hung from one side, broken, moss-covered, shifting slightly whenever the stream pushed through it. The sound was constant. Not loud, just water moving over wood. Water moving against metal. A slow, tired creak. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged. The front door hung crooked, chained from the outside. For a moment, Ben nearly turned back. Then he saw light beneath one of the boards. Very faint, yellow, gone almost as soon as he noticed it. He stepped closer. The air smelled of damp stone, rotten leaves, and bleach. Whatever waited inside was not part of the old stories. It was newer than that, cleaner, worse. The chain on the front door was old. The padlock was not. Ben stood staring at it, rain dripping down from his hair, heart beating hard enough to make him feel sick. He called Leah's name once, quietly. No answer. So he called again. Nothing. Then, from inside the mill, somewhere deep behind the walls, someone knocked. Once. Ben stopped breathing. Another knock. Not loud. Not strong. Weak. Human. He looked around for something to break the lock. There was a rusted iron bar near the old mill, half buried in the mud, so he went and picked it up. He wedged it through the chains and pulled until his palms burned. The first time, nothing happened. The second time, the chain started to scrape against the wood. And the third time, the padlock snapped loose and dropped into the mud. The sound was small. Too small for what it meant. But the door was open. Ben opened the door. The air inside was colder than outside. The front room of the mill had been cleared. Not recently, but deliberately. Old machinery had been pushed against the wall and covered with tarps. The floorboards were damp but swept. A plastic chair stood by a table near the door. On the table there was a torch, a ring of keys, a thermos, a folded newspaper, and a packet of antiseptic wipes. And with all of that, an old doubled-barrel shotgun. Ben stared at it. It was not hidden, not displayed, but just placed there, casually, like a tool someone would use often enough to leave within reach. Then, the knocking came again. From somewhere behind a plywood partition at the back of the room, Ben picked up the keys and not the gun. He would think about this later. How close he had been to ending everything before it began. Instead, he took the keys and moved deeper into the mill. The building had been divided into narrow corridors and rooms using cheap plywood and old doors. Some doors were open, some were locked from outside, but each had a bowl and each had a number written above it in black marker. There was a smell of bleach beneath it all, sweat, damp fabric, and fear. On a shelf near the corridor entrance, there were folded clothes, stacked by size. T-shirts, jeans, underwear, socks, all washed, all grey from repeated use. Beside them were plastic bags containing phones, wallets, watches, jewellery, and keys. Not hidden, sorted, almost filed. This evil was not chaotic. That's what made Ben feel cold. It was systematic. Room 1 was empty. A mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a blanket folded too neatly. Room 2 was empty as well, but the mattress was stained and there were scratches all over the doorframe. Room 3 contained a young man Ben did not know. He was sitting against the wall, knees drawn up, one eye shallowly shut. When Ben opened the door, The man did not move. "It's all right," Ben whispers to him. "I'm going to get you out." The man stared at him, then at the keys, then began to cry without making a sound. And as the first door opened, the mill seemed to remember. It was full of people. There were 7 people in the mill, 7 alive. Ben would learn this later. At the time, they were not numbers. They were faces appearing in doorways, hands covering mouths, bare feet on cold boards, eyes that did not trust rescue, because rescue was another thing that could have been taken away. 2 young men, 2 young women. An older woman who kept saying, "Please, please," even after the door was open. A pregnant girl who could not have been more than 20, sitting on the edge of a mattress with both hands wrapped around her stomach, rocking gently. Ben stopped outside her room. She looked up at him. Her hair was damp against her face. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes moved immediately to the keys in his hand, then to the corridor behind him. "Don't," she whispers to Ben. Ben freezes. "Don't what?" "Don't open them up if you can't get us out." "I can." She gave a broken, small laugh. "That's what the last one said." Ben stepped closer. "I'm looking for my sister. Have you seen her?" The girl's face changes. Not much, but enough. Ben felt his stomach drop. The girl looked towards the end of the corridor. "Room 6. Ben moved, but she grabbed his sleeve. Not hard. She did not have much strength. "He will know." "Who?" Her eyes moved towards the front room, towards the table, towards the gun. The kind man." Ben felt the room tilt. "What kind man?" She swallows. "The one who looks for us." And then he knew. Not completely, not without proof, but in the deep animal parts of himself that understood danger in foreign bus stations, border offices, alleys and jungle paths. Before his mind even found words for it. The one who looks for us. Arthur. Ben took her hand from his sleeve and gently as he could. "I am getting you out of here." The girl looks at him as she wants to believe him, but had forgotten how. Then she whispers, "Don't let him close the doors." Leah was still in room 6, at the far end. Ben almost didn't recognize her. Not because she was badly injured in any obvious way. That would have been easier somehow. Blood can be named. Bruises can be counted. But she looked emptied. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, barefoot, hair tangled, face grey beneath the dirt. Her blue coat was gone. Her eyes were open. But when Ben said her name, she did not react. "Leah?" Nothing. He kneels down in front of her. "Lee, it's me." For a moment, her eyes moved across her face like she was reading language she used to know. That recognition hit. Not relief, but recognition. Terror came with it. She grabbed his wrist with both hands so hard her nails cut into his skin. "Come on," he says, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're going home." Leah opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. "Leah!" She tries again. Nothing. Her throat moved, her face twisted. Still nothing. Whatever had happened in that room, all the rooms before it, had taken language from her. Ben put his arms around her. She shook without crying, and that was worse. Then, somewhere beyond the boarded windows, headlights washed across the walls. They were halfway back towards the front room when they heard the car. At first, Ben thought it was thunder. But then headlights moved across the boarded windows. The people in the corridor froze. Not all at once, but in waves. Like fear passing through water. The pregnant girl covered her mouth with both hands. The young man from room 3 backed silently into the wall. Leah's grip tightened around Ben until she almost might broke his fingers. Outside, a car door opened. Closed. Footsteps crossed the mud. Then Arthur's voice came through the front door, warm, almost cheerful. "I hope we've all been good." No one moved. Ben looked towards the table, towards the gun. It was still there. Arthur had left it there. Arthur would expect it to be there. Ben started forward. Leah would not let go. He gently pulled his wrist free. "Stay here," he whispers. She shook her head violently. "Stay here." He did not know if she understood. He moved as quietly as he could towards the front room. Arthur came in humming. Not a tune that Ben recognized. Just 3 or 4 notes repeated under his breath. He shut the door behind him, took off his coat, and hung it on the back chair. Then he stopped. The chain lay broken near the threshold. One of the room's doors stood open behind Ben. The keys were gone from the table, and Arthur turned his head slowly. His eyes moved for the gun. Ben reached it first. Almost. Arthur moved faster than an old man should have. His hands closed around that barrel as Ben grabbed the stock. For one terrible second, they stood at opposite ends of the table, both holding the gun. Arthur's face changed. Not into rage. Into disappointment. "Ben, you shouldn't have come here." Ben paused. Arthur pulled back. The table shifts. The thermos falls and rolls across the floor. Ben swings his elbow, catching Arthur across the jaw. Arthur stumbles, and the gun comes free in Ben's hand. He had never held one before. It was heavier than expected. Arthur straightened slowly, one hand against his mouth, blood darkening his lower lip. "That was a mistake," Arthur says to Ben. Even bleeding, even cornered, Arthur sounded like a man who believed the room belonged to him. Ben should have fired. He knew this later. In the clean, imaginary version of the story, he pointed the gun at Arthur Vale and ended him there. But real fear is clumsy. His hand shook. He didn't know if the gun was loaded, didn't know if the safety was on, did not know where to put his fingers. And Arthur knew this. Of course he did. Arthur steps forward. Put it down. Ben raises it. Don't. Arthur stops. Behind him, the corridor was dark. Behind Ben, people were breathing through fear. Ben laughs. A cracked, ugly sound. You understand? Yes. My sister is in there. I know. The calmness of him broke me. Arthur said it as if we were discussing lost property. I know, he repeats. I can explain. Ben stared. That was when he understood Arthur's real weapon had never been the gun. It was this. That voice. That steady, reasonable voice. The one that made horror sounds sound like a misunderstanding. Arthur takes another step. Ben lifts the gun higher, and Arthur stops again. Now think carefully, he says. There are frightened people here, damaged people, unwell people. If you make this worse, that's on you. On me? Yes, on you. Arthur's eyes flick forward towards the corridor. Do you think they'll help you? Do you think they'll stand up in court and make sense? Look at them. A sound comes from the corridor. A stifled sob. Arthur smiles sadly. You see? This is delicate. Ben's hand now gripped tighter around the gun. You locked them in rooms. I kept them alive. You took my sister. Leah came asking questions she didn't understand. Ben moves forward, and Arthur's voice sharpens. Careful. For a second, he sounded like the man from the photographs, the decorated officer, the superintendent, the man that everyone in Greywick had learned to obey. Now you walk out of here with that gun, Arthur says, and what happens? You think they'll believe you? You've been gone 7 years. You come back, your sister disappears, and now you found a derelict mill with a firearm inside and a dead, retired police officer? Ben says nothing, and Arthur lowers his voice. I know how this sounds, Ben. That's what matters. I know how things sound. You don't. And the awful thing was he was right. Not morally, not truly, but practically. Arthur knew statements, reports, timelines, doubt. He knew how to make victims look unreliable. He knew how to make fear sound like confession. He knew how to make himself sound necessary. Even standing in this place, with doors open behind him and blood on his mouth, Arthur Vale believed the story still belonged to him. Then Leah steps out the corridor. She moved slowly, one hand against the wall, bare feet soundless on the boards. Ben turned his head just enough to see her. Arthur did not look away from the gun. Leah, go back. She stops. Good girl. The words changed the room. Ben felt it. Not heard it, but felt it. The others in the corridor shifted. The pregnant girl appeared behind Leah. Then the young man from room 3. Then the older woman. Then another. Faces in the dim. Arthur saw them all. For the first time since entering the mill, something like uncertainty moved across his face. "Now," he said, still calm, "everyone needs to stay where they are." No one did. The young man from room 3 picked up the iron bar that Ben had dropped near the door. The older woman took the keys from the table, and the pregnant girl stood with one hand on Leah's shoulder. Arthur looked from face to face. His smile returned, but it was thinner now. "You do not want to do this." Nobody answers. "This won't undo anything." Still, nobody answered. Arthur looked at Ben. "You're responsible for them now, you hear?" This was Arthur's last attempt. Not to apologize, not to deny, to hand the weight to someone else. Ben lowered the shotgun. Arthur saw his chance and moved. Fast. He lunged for Ben. The young man hit him with the iron bar. Arthur went down hard. One knee striking the floor, one hand catching the table. The shotgun falls from Ben's grip, and Arthur reaches for it. But Leah kicks it away. And then everyone moves. Not like a mob, not like animals, like people who had spent too long behind locked doors and had finally found the man with the keys on his knees. Ben does not remember who struck first after that, or second. He just remembered Arthur's voice changing, commanding, then pleading. He remembered Arthur saying, "I help this town." He remembered someone answering, "You hurt us." He remembered the old mill wheel creaking outside. Water moving beneath the floor, and Leah pressing against him, shaking. Ben held her and looked away. He wanted to believe that this had made her better. It didn't. I wish I could tell you we handed Arthur Vale over. I wish I could say we were better than him, if that ever mattered. But there are rooms where the laws feel very far away. And in that room, with those doors open and Leah shaking against me, nobody was thinking about justice. We were thinking about keys, thinking about air, and we were thinking about never letting him have the chance to close another door. When it was over, Arthur Vale lay very still on the floor of the cold mill. His mouth slightly parted, as if even at the end he had one more explanation to offer. But nobody wanted to hear it. Ben carried Leah out just before dawn. Not because she couldn't walk, because she would not let go of him long enough to try. Behind them came the others. 7 people walked out that mill alive. Not safe, not healed, but alive. The woods looked different in the morning light. Smaller, ashamed somehow. Mist hung low between the trees. The stream whispered over stones. The broken wheel turned a few inches, stopped, and then turned again. Ben did not look back until they reached the end of Mill Road. From there, he could see the roof of the mill between the branches, a grey shape in grey light. For a moment, he thought of childhood, of throwing stones, or Leah saying it was haunted. She hadn't been wrong, but she hadn't been right. The cold mill had never been haunted. Haunted things belong to the dead. What waited in that place had been horribly, monstrously alive. The first police car arrived at 6 a.m. Then another. Then ambulances. Then more police. Then people from the town, standing behind the tape, hands over mouth, faces pale with the shock they would later claim was complete. Ben sat at the back of an ambulance with Leah wrapped in a foil blanket beside him. His mother arrived barefoot. His father fell to his knees in the road. Leah did not speak. Not when her mouth touched her face. Not when paramedics asked her name. Not when a police officer asked if she knew where she was. She stared at the trees. Ben held her hand. Her nails had left blood in his wrist. By noon, Arthur Vale's name was everywhere. By evening, the national news had arrived. By the next morning, the papers had found their phrase. Arthur Vale's atrocities. That's what they called it. Arthur Vale's atrocities. It sounded clean, almost historical, like something that had happened somewhere else, to people who were already gone. But some of them were not gone. 7 people came out that cold mill. 4 gave statements. 2 left Greywick and never returned. 1 died less than a year later. Leah came home. Or rather, her body did. The rest took longer, and some parts never did. I still do not know what happened to my sister during the 3 days she was missing. I know what the doctors said, I know what the police asked, and I know what the newspapers tried to imply. But Leah never told us. What Arthur did inside that place, he took the words from her when he died. Greywick did what towns do when they become public. It performed horror. People cried outside the lantern's hook. People left flowers near the police photograph. People said they trusted him. People said they had no idea. That was the sentence that Ben hated most. No idea. He heard it from the landlord, heard it from the shop, from the men who drunk beside Arthur for 30 years, from neighbours who watched him drive down Mill Road at night and decided darkness was none of their business. No idea. Maybe that was true. Maybe nobody knew everything. But knowing everything is not the same as knowing enough. They knew girls went missing. They knew boys went missing. They knew Arthur always helped. They knew questions stopped when he answered. They knew the mill had lights some nights. They knew not to go there. They knew to look away. Leah lived for 9 years after the mill. Lived is the word people used because there isn't really a better one. She ate, she slept, walked sometimes with Ben along the harbour, but never near the cliffs. She wrote little notes when she had to. Tea, cold, home, no. She even learned to smile again, but only in brief, careful ways, like opening a door a crack to check if the world was still dangerous. She never returned to work, never went back to the lantern's hook, and never said anyone's name again. She never spoke at all. Not once. Until the night she died. It was winter. Rain against the window. Our mother sat at the side of the bed. Ben was sitting the other side. Their father had been gone 3 years by this point, his heart giving up quietly one night in the garden. Leah was thin. Too thin. Her eyes had sunk deep into her face, but where they opened, they were clear. Clearer than they had been in years. She looked at Ben, then at their mother, then past them both towards the corner of the room. Ben turned, but there was nothing there. Only shadow. Only the wardrobe. Only the dark shape of a chair beneath a folded blanket. Leah's mouth opened. At first, Ben thought she was trying to breathe. Then the sound came out. Small, dry, and a voice he had not heard in 9 years. One word. Arthur. Arthur Vale's Atrocities. That's the name they gave it. A name clean enough for papers, clean enough for reports, clean enough for people to say out loud without thinking too hard about it. But Greywick was never just a story about one man. It was about people who looked away. The questions nobody asked. The missing posters taken down before they had time to fade. We like to imagine monsters announce themselves. Claws, teeth, shadows in the corner of a room. But sometimes they smile. Sometimes they help. Sometimes they know exactly how the truth is supposed to sound. And by the time we see them clearly, someone has already learned how to disappear. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, keep an eye on that glitch, because sometimes the glitch is truth.